Picture this for a second. You wake up in the morning, open your phone, and scroll through social media. Someone just posted their breakfast. Someone else uploaded vacation photos. Another person is celebrating their gym progress, their relationship, their achievements, their entire life in carefully arranged squares on a glowing screen. It feels like everyone is broadcasting their story to the world. But then there is that one person. You know the one I'm talking about. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it is someone you follow, maybe it is even you. They almost never post anything. No life updates, no personal stories, no daily selfies, no emotional captions about their struggles or victories. Their profile might exist, but it feels quiet, mysterious, almost invisible. And people often assume things about them. Maybe they are boring, maybe they are antisocial, maybe they have nothing going on in their life. But psychology tells a very different story. Because the men who don't share their lives on social media often operate from a completely different mental framework. Their brains treat attention, privacy, and identity in a way that is surprisingly rare in today's digital world. And once you understand the psychology behind it, the silence starts to make sense. Let me explain. Imagine two different kinds of people walking through the same city street. The first person is constantly checking reflections in shop windows. They adjust their clothes, they think about how they look, they imagine how others might perceive them. The second person walks with their head forward. They notice the buildings, the sounds, the movement of the city. Their attention is pointed outward, not inward. Social media works in a similar way. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called external validation loops. When someone posts online and receives likes, comments, or reactions, the brain releases dopamine. It is the same reward chemical that fires when you win a game, eat good food, or achieve a goal. Your brain starts learning a pattern. Share something, receive attention, feel rewarded. So naturally, people repeat the behavior. But the man who rarely shares his life on social media often has a weaker attachment to that loop. His brain simply does not rely on digital validation in the same way. His sense of identity comes from somewhere else. Maybe it comes from real-world achievements. Maybe it comes from personal values. Maybe it comes from quiet self-respect that does not require witnesses. Think about it like a campfire. Some people need a crowd around the fire to enjoy the warmth, the laughter, the attention, the applause. The fire feels bigger when everyone is watching. Other people are perfectly comfortable sitting beside that fire alone. The warmth is enough. Psychologically, this often points to a strong internal validation system. Instead of asking, "Do people approve of me?" the mind asks a different question. Do I approve of myself? And that tiny shift changes everything. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Research in personality psychology suggests that people who share less personal information publicly often have higher levels of what psychologists call self-boundaries. In simple terms, they have a very clear sense of what belongs to them and what belongs to the world. Not everything needs an audience. Think about the last deeply meaningful moment in your life. Maybe it was a quiet conversation with someone you love. Maybe it was a personal breakthrough. Maybe it was a difficult challenge you overcame. Did posting it online make it more meaningful? For some people, sharing enhances the experience. It turns a moment into a story. But for others, sharing actually reduces its value. It feels like turning something private into a performance. The man who stays silent on social media often protects those moments, not because he's hiding his life, but because he understands something subtle about human attention. When too many eyes are watching, authenticity sometimes begins to fade. Imagine you're telling a story to one close friend versus telling the same story to a stadium of strangers. Your tone changes, your words change, your behavior shifts slightly. That invisible audience changes the way we present ourselves, and some people simply prefer living their life without that constant audience effect. There's another fascinating psychological angle here, and it has to do with identity construction. Social media quietly encourages people to build what psychologists call a curated self. You choose photos carefully. You write captions that frame your experiences in a certain way. Over time, a digital version of you begins to emerge, almost like a character in a story. And maintaining that character can become exhausting. Some people post constantly because they feel pressure to keep the narrative alive. They have followers watching, expectations building, a digital identity that must be updated. But the man who rarely posts sidesteps that entire psychological burden. He does not have to maintain a digital persona. His identity exists in real conversations, real actions, and real experiences. Think of it like the difference between someone who spends hours decorating a shop window and someone who is busy running the shop itself. Both exist in the same world, but their focus is completely different. Now, this does not mean that people who share their lives online are shallow or insecure. That would be an unfair oversimplification. Social media can be creative, inspiring, and even deeply meaningful. But the absence of posting sometimes signals a different psychological priority: privacy, focus, emotional independence. In fact, studies on digital behavior suggest that people who use social media less frequently often report higher levels of concentration, lower anxiety related to social comparison, and stronger presence in offline relationships. Think about how often social media pulls your attention away from the present moment. You might be at dinner with friends, but part of your brain is thinking about capturing the perfect photo. The man who does not share his life online is often fully inside the moment itself. No audience, no documentation, just experience. There's also a quiet confidence that can develop in this kind of mindset. When someone stops measuring their life through public reactions, their decisions become more personal. They choose activities because they genuinely enjoy them, not because those activities will look impressive online. Imagine going on a hike purely for the silence of the forest, not for the picture at the top of the mountain. It sounds simple, but in a world driven by visibility, that kind of simplicity is surprisingly powerful. Now, of course, silence online can also create mystery. Humans are naturally curious creatures. When someone shares everything, there's very little left to imagine. But when someone shares almost nothing, people start wondering, what is he doing? What is his life really like? Psychologically, mystery creates intrigue because our brains are wired to fill in missing information. We start constructing stories in our heads. Sometimes the quietest person in the room becomes the most interesting one. But here's the deeper point. The man who does not share his life on social media is not necessarily trying to appear mysterious. In many cases, he simply doesn't see his life as content. His experiences are not material for an audience. They're just life, work, friendships, personal growth, challenges, victories, moments that belong to him and the people actually present. And there's something quietly powerful about that mindset. Because in a world where almost everything is documented, posted, analyzed, and judged, choosing not to broadcast your life can become a form of psychological independence. It's a reminder that your story doesn't have to be public to be meaningful. Your progress doesn't need applause to be real. Your happiness doesn't need proof. And maybe that's the most important shift of perspective here. The goal of life was never to create the most impressive highlight reel. It was to actually live the moments that highlight reel tries to capture. So, if you're someone who rarely shares your life online, understand this. Your silence does not mean your life is empty. Sometimes it means the opposite. It means your life is happening in places where cameras are off, screens are dark, and the experience itself matters more than the reaction. And honestly, that might be one of the most underrated forms of freedom in the modern world. But now I'm curious about you. Are you the type of person who shares your life online, or do you prefer to keep most of your story private? And more importantly, why?
Take a moment and think about it, then tell me in the comments. I read them all, and the conversations there often become the most interesting part of these videos. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind everyday human behavior, make sure you subscribe, because the human mind is full of quiet patterns like this one, and once you start noticing them, the world becomes a much more fascinating place.